right, everybody. Guess what? Guess what? We are back on the podcast, Surviving Sibling Loss, the Forgotten Mourners podcast. And I am not by myself today. I have a guest with me, a fellow surviving Sib who found me on Facebook a couple of weeks ago and has been like, hey, I would love to be a part of a conversation with you. And I said, well, all right, the more, the merrier. So, welcome, Sib. Welcome to the podcast. And I will stop right here and let you introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Chris. And I will introduce myself and my brother. So my name is Maggie Bauer, and my older brother and only sibling was Chris Bauer. So maybe for the rest of this podcast, I might go by his nickname, which I called him was Bubby. And then his friends called him CB Dans because it was Christopher Daniel Bauer. So I might go with those because I don't want to confuse the Chris's.
Right, right.
Right.
I immediately
You know?
felt connected because I was like, her brother's name is Chris, y'all. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Well,
definitely think it was meant to be for us to connect and share our stories here. So
yeah,
thank you for having me.
yes, I believe so. Thank you for reaching out in the big land of social media. Sometimes we just all kind of get lost in the shuffle, and it's always good to be able to connect to a fellow surviving sibling. I hate that we have to connect in the way that we connect, but because we are using this opportunity to be able to not only reach out and provide information on our journey, our grieving journey, because it's very unique. We are the forgotten mourners for so many reasons why. But we just want to make sure that not only for ourselves, but for other siblings, that you're not alone in this process. Yeah, you're not alone. So if you're fresh or if you're one of the old heads, it does not matter. You're still on this journey and we're on this journey together. So, yeah.
Right, right. Like if you're fresh into it, there's just so much. But then there's also the grievers, maybe similar to you, that it happened so many years ago, but there weren't resources and there are now. And they now just finally have the opportunity to share and talk about it and like have that
Yeah.
safe space to open up. And so, yeah, just because it happened 30, 40, 50 years ago, like we're here to validate, all sibling loss, right? Not just, a certain age, because I think sometimes older people are like, well, you know, it didn't happen when I was in my 20s or teens. So, but it's just as valid.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. So, introduce us to Chris, your brother. Talk to us about his personality.
Okay. So CB Dan's was a very active kid. And so there were a lot of times growing up where I was somewhat more of like the mature kid because he had ADD, he had ADHD, and he did have some learning disabilities. But to me, he was just my older brother. Like he was the brother that, could, take things apart and put them back together in an afternoon. Like he was really, really that kind of mechanical aptitude and he was the kid that put a mini golf course around our house, and we lived in the suburbs and we had a bunch of kids around. So he took like old soup cans, dug holes, and was like, okay, everybody's got to pay 25 cents or whatever it was to, have the mini golf course around the house. That was part of growing up was all the kids in the neighborhood and Chris and his activities. And he was really from a young age outdoorsy, loved fishing. I mean, that was huge for him. We're here in Minnesota and winters get really rough. And he'd be out there not with like an ice house, but like a 5-gallon bucket and his buddy, and they'd be fishing, like
Nice.
he yeah. And so he learned some carpentry skills from my maternal grandfather and then turned a career into it. So it was kind of really neat to see him kind of use that energy towards his career. And it was really neat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we already have a lot in common. My brother was
Yeah.
very active too, and he was my older brother, and he made a dirt road construction something in the back of our house so we could ride our bikes, and we had our own interstate system, and all the neighborhood boys were at our house.
Did
Yeah.
you have jumps?
Yes, we had everything. We made everything. And
Oh.
our dad stopped us from making it like National Geographic because we wanted to build a little house out there too. And they said, we had the little sticks and stuff, and my dad went out there and tore it up. So
Enough was enough.
enough was enough. Our
Till
interstate,
somebody gets hurt, right? Because
yeah.
eventually somebody always gets hurt.
And there was a lot of injuries going on in our lives. So yes, definitely can connect with that. With your brother being his own person,
Hmm.
that's what it sounds like. Very independent and
Hmm.
very focused on what he likes to do.
Hmm. Yeah. Yes, he was. Yeah. And he was really like he was tall, so 6'2" ish, and like big, lean guy, and he big heart, really big heart. And I think that sometimes our society, like I definitely think that our society doesn't really make room or encourage that, especially in men. So like where do they have a space to be exactly who they are when society's telling them to be tougher, stronger,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
put
So
up a shield?
yeah, it is hard, and I'm glad that you said that. My brother painted my toenails when I was in when I was a little older in middle school. Painted my toenails, and he's just concentrating. And I was thinking, this boy is crazy, but that was part. That's it. That was him.
Yeah, yeah, right. He was just doing it for you, and
Yeah,
yeah.
most definitely. So talk to me about you all's relationship.
We had a really good relationship. I mean, like growing up, it was more of the classic style where we'd snuggle on the couch, fight over the remote because he wanted to watch, like fishing shows, and I wanted to watch Jack Hanna and like animal shows, and we had
Oh,
one TV,
yeah.
and we'd fight over it, and then eventually I'd probably start crying, and then my parents would get involved, and then Chris would get, in trouble. And it took years actually for my mom to point out to my dad, and she's like, Bruce, you don't see it. Maggie starts it. Well, that was the beginning of the end for me, because once my dad saw that, then I was the one that was getting in trouble all the time. And we would snuggle, we would wrestle, and then I'd cry, and we'd fight, I'd cry, and then we'd make up, and kind of rinse repeat thing. um yeah, and so that was a lot. I left Minnesota for college, and he stayed in Minnesota, starting his career. And then we kind of, morphed into the moving towards kind of the adult friendship phase. He'd come and visit me once or twice a year. He loved hanging out with my college girlfriends, and why wouldn't he, right? Um, and then yeah, like, so then when we kind of became adults, so Chris died by suicide when I was 28 and he was 31. And I really feel um like we were really getting into our adult friendship, and I feel like that got taken away. And
Mhm.
it still makes me so sad,
Yeah.
because you hear it, I hear it, probably most people listening hear it, that people say a lot that their siblings are their best friends. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh man, like we missed out on that, or
Mhm.
we had it for a time frame, and then it disappeared. So um yeah, Chris was a really a really good human being.
Yeah. Good human being. He sound like he was a great human being, a big
Mhm.
big brother. It took on a big brother role.
Yeah. Yeah, he was definitely, one of my cheerleaders. I think he was probably a little like, he wasn't like open about it, but just like, yeah, he was always, one of my cheerleaders, and it really hurts to not have him around.
Yeah, yeah. So talk about 20 being 28 and your brother was 31. And how old are you now?
I'm 39.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're coming up. August will be 11 years that he's been gone.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been, that decade. Looking back, social media has the decade challenges, and it's really kind of interesting and fascinating to look back on the 10 years and see where I've come from, and how I've tried to do my best to not only honor my brother and also honor my own grief journey, because it hurts. It's by far the most tragic and traumatic and painful experience of my life.
Yeah, yeah. So, and expound for me honoring your own grief.
Say
What is
that again.
what is it like to honor your own grief?
Well, you might get the impression from me, and if you have, you would be right that I want to push through things. I want to face things head on. And I think after several years, I thought, why aren't I further along in my journey? Like, I feel stuck. Like, I literally had a dream of Chris's big red truck, and I was driving it, and I was on a road, like a dirt road. And then all of a sudden, there's mud everywhere, and I'm spinning tires because I'm stuck.
Wow.
Like, this is, but in actuality, like, I don't think that I really was. I just think that I thought I should be further along. Like, there was some pressure that I was putting on myself, or what I'd learned from society as to where I should be, or how much I should be crying or shouldn't be crying, or how sad I should be feeling. And this is, 4, 5, 6 years in. And like, okay, well, it's been this long. I should have a shoulding on ourselves, right? I
Yes.
should have a better career. I should um be living in a different place, like a better place. I was living in a basement apartment, and like, that's probably not ideal for most people. um I should have, a partner, like all these things of my life should be different, and had Chris not died, it would have been. And I think I put some blame on that, and
Yeah.
that's not really helpful,
Yeah.
useful.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate all of that. Because I definitely can feel some similarities in there. The older I got in college, and just this pressure of having to continue to do what I'm supposed to do, and just be the best at everything, and or attempt to be the best at everything. And when I'm not, the biggest disappointment, because I feel like I'm missing out on something. Something's just not right. It's not adding up. It's not connecting. So I definitely can understand those feelings. Yeah.
Right? Like, why aren't I further along just in my life in general? Like,
Yeah.
I definitely, I had a hard case of that put on myself. It was totally put on myself. It wasn't my parents, it wasn't friends, nobody else was putting this on me.
Mhm. Now, was there ever a time where it felt hard to talk about what happened with your brother?
Yes. I multiple phases it was difficult. So Bubby CB Dan's Chris he died by suicide, and as far as we know, he didn't leave a note. And um there is societal and religious stigma against somebody dying by suicide. And so right off the bat, one of the family members said, well, we're going to say that it's a work accident. It's like, well, but that's not the truth. That's not how it happened. And so it was, there were definitely times that it was difficult to talk about. And so there's that piece of it, of sharing the truth. And then there's also the piece of it of, am I safe enough with this person to share part of my story? How well do I know this person? Are they asking me because they care deeply about me, or are they asking and then they kind of get the shock factor and then they just move on? Like they don't actually want to know about Chris's life, and they don't really want to know how I'm doing. And
Yeah.
so when you kind of figure that out with people, you learn your own process of kind of making this snap assessment of, is this person worthy of me sharing part of my grief story? Because I don't want to walk away from this conversation and feel worse. Like I already feel bad. And if I don't feel supported, then then it's just like, man, I really,
Sucks.
really, it's not worth it, right? But it's hard to figure out who's who. It's hard.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of that, learning how to advocate for yourself, especially when you're like deep in grief. And there's different schools of thought on that. That some people think that it's your only job to grieve, and you don't have to teach anybody else how to treat you.
Mm, mm,
I'm of a different school of thought where they're probably going to keep treating me a certain way that I don't like, unless I speak up, and finding the language around that. And specifically for my family, it's like, well, we don't really want to focus on how he died. We want to focus on how Chris lived. And so that's one of the things of just, being ready to change the conversation if that's the direction that it goes, and it's not helpful.
yeah. Yeah. So, as a surviving sibling, and there's no other siblings, right? It's just you.
Correct. Yep. Just like you.
Yeah, yeah. So, which is difficult. Um,
Hmm.
Nobody else can really speak that language, and I've had some other siblings on here that lost multiple siblings. I've had some that had other siblings that they could talk to, but for us having no other sibling and then therefore being our parents' only surviving child, talk to me about your journey with that.
Yes, absolutely. Like, both of us being the younger sisters, like we don't know what life was like without our brothers.
Right.
Like they were always there. And like my mom tells me, like she brought me home, from the hospital, and Chris is, 3, and he was like, "Mommy, I'm not the little boy anymore. I'm the big brother." Like he got it right away. And like that was his role. And I mean, think about all of like the family dinners and the holiday dinners and the birthdays where we were sharing, Chris's birthday's in February, I'm in April. So, all of those experiences was the 4 of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't one of those people, I hear about siblings that like wished, their sibling away. Like we were always each other's kind of friend and confidant, because they're your first person. They're the ones that you learn how to share with and communicate and like fight poorly with, and then try to do better. And you learn your social skills from them, right? And then, like all of these family experiences and, Chris and I, I was an adult, so I was 28 when he was gone. And it was just so difficult kind of having that attention
Mhm.
be fully on me.
Mhm.
And that was never anything I was looking for. Like it was always shared attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
And oh man, it's just, and my parents do a good job of talking about Chris. We really do bring him up, and he's still very much a part of our family. And, I mean, he's always on our minds, but we're not always sharing with each other. Um, but one of my biggest fears, and I've verbalized it to them, is caring for my parents
Yes.
as they age.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it was never meant to be alone.
Yep.
The fact that when my parents are gone, we'll have to clean out the house and those types of things. Like it was mine and Chris's joke that my brother would get the grandfather clock.
Yeah.
Like it was just gonna go to him. Like we talked about certain things, and like Chris and I could only make fun of our parents a certain way. Like nobody else can have that internal humor. It was like basically, right, the sibling inside joke that no one else will ever get. Or
Yeah.
like, what are the stories that I'm forgetting that Chris would have remembered? Like that sucks. It
Yeah.
really does.
Yeah.
And I love my parents. Like my parents are they're wonderful people. Um, but it is difficult to think about like how I'm gonna support them solely um without Chris there, because we were supposed to do that together. And I had some anger and actually rage about Chris choosing to leave.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, there were multiple factors of him dying. But I felt um definitely abandoned by him because
Yeah.
we were supposed to do this journey together. Like and that's one of the pieces about suicide is that each story is unique. That word is a very broad word. And once you start talking to people about it, they all have kind of a different version of what happened within their family. And so within our family, um, we hadn't experienced in our immediate family or extended family, somebody that had died by suicide. And to be honest with you, I've talked to my mom about it. Like we never thought that that was an option for Chris. Like
Mhm.
we were completely blindsided. And the flip of the coin is that there are some siblings that their siblings have struggled with, mental health issues their whole entire lives. Um, and so I just want to recognize that um the siblings that have experienced suicide, all of our stories are unique, just like our grief stories are unique.
Unique. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And again, I appreciate you sharing your heart when it comes to suicide, death, and being blindsided by it, and feeling the anger, because the anger is very real, very real. Um, in with my brother's death, even though it was a cancer death, and you said about the abandonment, I felt like my brother abandoned me, like he had some type of control when he passed. I was like, he's supposed to be strong, stronger. You're not supposed to go. How do you be? How does a sibling who came into this world with a brother go without a brother? I could not understand it. And I could not figure out for the life of me, my why question just kept lingering for a long time. and it took it many years to put the why question to bed.
Oh, you are so, so right about that. And
Yeah.
that's really interesting to hear from your perspective, because I think a lot of times that's probably somewhat a given question with suicide. So um it also, I would just repeat exactly what you said. It also took me a very long time to put the why question to bed. And in that, I've figured out, like, my visualization for it is that it was a puzzle piece, a puzzle, and that it was up to me to find the pieces and put them into a puzzle and figure out, like, what were all the whys on why Chris died by suicide. And man, it took so long. And just recently, somebody, I was talking with them about it, somebody in the grief and bereavement realm, and she said, well, Maggie, maybe that final piece is your piece of advocacy for your brother. And I was like, wow, that was like a really beautiful, kind thing to say. Thank you. I'd never thought of it that way, because it always, for all of us, it'll always feel like a piece of our heart's missing,
Yeah.
and that the only way that that could get fixed is something that isn't possible, with having them back alive in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to me about the advocacy part, because we know what I'm doing, and I'm a therapist, my day job, and then I have this podcast, and we talked earlier about me running away from grief work, because it's heavy heart work, and it's a work that I had to do on my own self first. So
Yes,
talk to me about your advocacy.
sure. um yeah, well, there's different pieces to it. I kind of feel like I grew up comfortable with grief. My mom's mom, so my maternal grandma, died when I was 3, and I had other losses, people in my life, just significant losses, pretty constantly. And so actually, I had applied for grad school for social work, and my interview was 3 days after Chris died,
Oh wow.
and it went well. And then I eventually decided that the master's level workload wouldn't be appropriate for me. You know, I mean, literally
Yeah.
6 months later. And that was a difficult decision too, because I really wanted it. And so I shifted and said, well, I wanted to go into grief work. And
Yeah.
then I thought, well, there actually aren't a whole lot of classes, and they're all elective. They're not mandatory as a mental health worker,
They're
which is
not.
wild.
They're
Wild.
not. I'm glad you
How
said that.
is that? Like it's just wild to me that an experience, not everyone is going to experience losing their sibling, but we're all going to experience grief. And grief is, it's not just the death of a loved one, right? I mean, there's over 40 different experiences that cause that grief feeling to us. Moving, intangible losses, like, loss of innocence, loss of trust. So there's the gamut of how many grief experiences we're going to have in our lives. Is everyone on earth is going to experience it. And how is it that our mental health professionals aren't better trained to recognize that? It's wild to me. So I found in 2013 the grief recovery method and became a certified grief recovery specialist. And that the grief recovery method is a pretty, like, it has a format, and it's pretty scheduled. And that actually works well for kind of how my brain works. There's a definitive, like, start, middle, and end, and a lot of education about grief in general. So I did start an LLC, and like Chris, neither one of us had started a business before. Chris, Bubby. Um, and so I didn't know how to run a business, and I'm 1 year out of losing my brother. So I had it for 3 years. And it didn't work out because I thought that if I just kind of hung up my shingle, like people would come flocking and want to talk about grief because I'm comfortable with it.
Mhm.
So aren't there other people that are? And they're kind of few and far between.
They are.
Um, yeah, so that was, a huge learning experience. And if I'm being completely honest, did I use my grief work to hide behind my own grief to keep busy? Yep, sure did.
Mhm.
Right? Because that's kind of one of the myths about grief. There's a lot of myths about it, but one of them is to keep busy. And oh man, I can be the queen at that.
Wow. I've done it.
Yeah, yeah. And so the advocacy journey continued on. So I lived in North Dakota when Chris died, and I moved back a year later. Because that first year was if I moved back to Minnesota, I felt like I would try to be everything for my parents, knowing that that wouldn't be possible, but I would still try. Like there's no possible way to replace Bubby, but yet I knew I would try to probably hold their grief more than my own. So I stayed in North Dakota, and I was finishing a research project where I got to hike around a national park, which was also a really incredible piece of my journey on healing. And then when I got back to Minnesota, I researched, grief coalitions. And since we are in the suburbs of Minneapolis and St. Paul, there are resources. So I started going to some of the local grief coalitions, and then also the Compassionate Friends. And they support parents, grandparents, and there are sibling groups within the Compassionate Friends. And what's kind of funny about it is that most siblings experience their parents dragging them to some sort of peer-to-peer group, and I'm the opposite, where I drug my parents there.
Yeah.
So, another piece of advocacy there, right?
Advocate for
Yeah.
yourself and your parents. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Awesome. Awesome. And so
Yes.
I have heard you say earlier that you live on a farm, which is fascinating to me because I want a piece of land myself. So
Oh,
talk
good.
to me about your farm and
Good.
your plans.
Well, I hope I can be an inspiration to you then. So I've always had a love, for as long as I can remember, a love for horses. And the same grandfather that started teaching Chris his carpentry skills saw my love for horses and found a place up near the cabin that taught riding lessons. So I would go up there periodically, and then it morphed, and I actually didn't own my own horse until I was in my late 20s. Um, and and then at that point, it was like, someday I'm going to have my own farm, because once you get a horse, then you have to pay somebody else, board it, and have them take care of it. Well, the goal was that someday I'd be able to look out the window and see them. So if I look out the window, I can see the horses. And that was a part of that, like pushing myself where I should be further than I was, and not trusting life. And I
Mm.
heard that in a different podcast
Oh,
um
yes.
not that long ago. And I didn't understand what that meant, because so many times in my life, like I hadn't trusted life, because bad things had happened, right? And so then we just, like, things get messy, and we don't, like, trust our intuition, and I push and push and push, and I didn't figure out, like, how to allow things to flow and unfold. And once I figured that out, then I got into a relationship, and we both of our goals was to live on land. And so we found land an hour north of Minneapolis, and it's it's 32 acres. And Ben, or Benny that I call him, my partner, fiance. There's a little creek that runs through it, and he named that Chris's Creek. So um, we have the house and the barn were built in 1865.
Nice.
Right, right. So the house has been remodeled, but the barn is just pretty incredible with the character that it has. And then there's a pasture for the horses. Beyond that, there's a marsh with where the creek is, and then beyond that there are tamarack trees. And I joked around with Ben when we finally got the property and we got the keys in our hands, and we weren't on the property yet, right? Because you have to sign everything and all that jazz. And I joked, I'm like, man, if Chris were here, he'd already be sitting in the driveway waiting for us to show up, like just ready to start unpacking things. And he would have already explored, most of the land, and Bubby and Benny would have, probably gone deer hunting or something like that. I think they would have been thick as thieves. So that's yeah, there's so many pieces to it. And being a horse person, I've always acknowledged that horses have really been there for me in a way that no human can. Like there's just there is this unconditional love, but there's also like they they kind of force you to be present. So I remember growing up, like in high school and stuff, like there were times that I'd be working with the horse and trying to saddle him up or whatever, and I'd get my foot stepped on. And now I can metaphorically say and know for fact that I wasn't being present.
Mm,
Probably wasn't even being present in my own body.
mm,
And
mm.
that horse was like,
Yeah.
time to be present. Like you need to be in the moment.
Hey.
And I can say that now. I'm much more versed at horse behavior. Um, and and their quiet presence, because horses are always present. They're, as far as we know, they're not really focusing on the past or worrying about the future like we do. So they definitely have, I've found quite a bit of healing properties in them. So
I like that. I like that.
yeah,
You do.
yeah,
Yeah, because I was thinking about, I'm always thinking about something completely different. People, my parents by now know I'm going to throw something out there. So, and things look so unconditional. I mean, because my brother and I, our pastime is being in the yard in the back of our house, and my parents had a little mini garden, and we would race through the mini garden, and we wouldn't tell them we'll tear up their corn stalks or nothing while we were racing. But it was just like a good fun time. We didn't have shoes on. It was just like the life. And then being out there and in our dirt bikes and things on his little interstate system and highway system, I have this desire to return back to land. And so when you said you had a farm, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Because it's something, of a goal of mine.
yeah, yeah. And it there were times where it felt like insurmountable, of like, am I ever going to achieve this?
Yeah.
Like I was so close to just kind of giving up hope that it wouldn't happen,
Wow.
forgetting that like it wasn't going to happen on my timeline. It was the bigger, the universal timeline. And and the neatest part is that it did happen. And one of the hard parts is that Chris isn't here to experience it and enjoy it, because I know he would. And it's it is hard work. It is hard work, you know, like the elements, like we are farmers. We farm hay and we've got beef cattle. And you know, it takes blood, sweat, and tears and commitment. Um, and and there's joy too. And that's been something really hard for me to find because I said earlier that I'm like comfortable in grief, like I'm okay in it. But if I experience joy, like is it going to slip out of my fingers really quickly? Like how long is it going to stay? If it's, you know, when is the other shoe going to drop kind of feeling when I'm happy? And like that's important to acknowledge. And that is one of the things that I am constantly working on 10 and a half, almost 11 years
Yeah.
in. Like that's where I'm at in my grief journey, like right now, is being okay with the fact that I have achieved one of my like adult dream
Yeah.
dreams. And it's amazing. But it also feels like another piece of us moving on from Chris,
Mm-hmm.
moving forward without him.
Yeah.
But at the same time, then, you know, I am, but I'm also not because I'm not forgetting him. I'm never going to forget him. And I am able to share memories about him and think about what he would be doing in present tense. I mean, I might be wrong because it's right, it's just a story, but it is like I am at a place where I can think about it and not break down. And that's okay. I mean, everybody's journey is different
Different.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So I appreciate this working and living in grief in a world or in a society that is so grief avoidant, that we try to move on from our memories, we try to move on from our feelings, we try to move on from so much, and then it ends up, catching up with us at so many different points in our lives, whether we buy something new or we move or we find a partner or something. It seems to rear, I don't want to say it's ugly head, but it'd be an ugly head if you try to live or run from it. That's when it
Mhm.
becomes so ugly, when you try to run from it, which
Yeah.
I did as a young adult.
But what tools did you have?
Oh,
Right?
none.
I mean,
Church.
were you,
That was it. That was it. And I can say I had people who were aware, and they were grieving too. And I have to think about that too, because they were a part of our family community, church community. They were grieving as well. But um, to speak into the situation, I did not have that. I didn't have that at all. So it became, this is my journey, and with my journey, how can I find elements to help myself? Um, and I didn't get into therapy until I was good and grown. Right in the pandemic is when I got into therapy, which was so helpful, and wish I had done it way sooner. But and this is the reason why I have this podcast too, because it just was a very long, isolating journey.
Mhm.
So yeah, yeah,
2 points I want to make.
yeah.
One is that I too, I was actually in therapy when Chris died. So that was a positive thing. And then I didn't go back into it until probably year like 5 or 6. And again, it was like something happened in a relationship or like a guy that I was dating. Like I didn't even know him that well, but I didn't like how I acted. And I was like, man, I'm just not acting like myself. Like I don't really like this person right now.
Yeah.
Like, I think I need help. Like, I've got to process the deeper stuff.
Hmm.
And so I found a therapist that was a really good fit. And we did EMDR therapy together. And that was something that I was really willing and really open to do. I went into it being like, yep, I'm here, I'm ready to to do the deep hard work. And I would come out of those sessions kind of um I wouldn't quite say numb, but like very exhausted, like kind of the exhausted numb. And then, a couple times I stupidly like made, plans for that evening. And I was like, can't do that anymore. Like I have to allow myself like the downtime afterwards of just letting my mind and my heart and my body just process things and just be.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I found it to be really helpful. And how I describe EMDR is that my brain kept picking the traumatic files, just
Mhm.
kept picking them. Like I couldn't really stop it, and I couldn't figure out when it was going to happen throughout the day. Um, and then, so if my brain is a filing cabinet, it kept picking the wrong file or the traumatic file. It's not really a wrong one. And then, after EMDR, like that file became more neutral, and it didn't have the powerful emotions of anger and rage and just deep hurt and broken heartedness behind it. And then we also had the opportunity during those therapy sessions to kind of rewrite the story a little bit. And there were certain things throughout my life that I wish I had said or done something different.
Mm.
And so in therapy, I had the opportunity kind of like maybe advocate for myself when I was a child and I didn't do it in reality. And those pieces ended up being, really helpful to me.
Good, good. Now, this has been and I know in personality, I am more bubbly and things of that nature. But it's definitely, we have our peaks, we have our valleys, we have our moments. I still have my moments. And again, it's okay. And now that I'm older, I'm 40 and I was 14 when my brother passed. Now it's like, okay, I acknowledge my feelings and it's okay. It is okay to take this day off. It is okay to be slow today on an anniversary. And then again, we had 26 years, April 10th of this year, and it's okay. It is okay to feel some type of way, even if it's been 2 months to yesterday to 40. We talked about this early, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. They're still a part of you. So no matter how much time has passed, you will still have various feelings. And you might even, feel happy, one anniversary, happy that you even got the chance to be a brother or a sister to your sibling because they were just so good to you. And
Right.
they,
Like so grateful that
yeah,
we had our lives together. Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, yeah.
yeah. Because I heard you say your brother was 3 years older than you, and mine was too, but he was like a second parent. Hmm. Yeah.
I wanted to highlight I read this article recently, and it's from the group What's Your Grief? And the name of the article is Stop Trying to Heal from Grief.
Mm,
And I'm not going to go into the article, but what it says that language is really important. And it also says that, here's one of the highlighted pieces, that grief is healing.
yeah.
Wow. So, those of you that are interested in reading, kind of a different article, um, man, I was like, gosh, that would have been cool to read
Yeah.
earlier on,
Yeah.
because saying that grief is healing made so much sense to me. Like that's the thing, is that we get stuck when we aren't grieving.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like when we're pushing it aside, when we're being busy, when we're trying to replace the loss, when we're trying to avoid it
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
whatever
Yeah.
poison you want to pick,
Well,
right?
yeah. Because we've done it. Oh,
Right? I mean, even there's like, yeah, I mean, yes, so I just read that and I just thought that was so profound to me of just like, yeah, like, and the thing is that grief is healing from this is a lifelong journey. And I like to say that you're forever healing if you choose to,
you choose to.
right? Because it is this active process that we have to choose. It was forced on us.
It was.
We didn't choose this for ourselves, but we have to choose how we're going to deal with it or not deal with it. And just like you said, like some days our best is like 10%.
Mm-hmm.
And me learning that's okay. Like that is what I needed because I was trying to push myself to do more, be bigger, bitter, be bigger,
Yeah.
better, more. And
Yeah. Yeah.
why? Why? Like it was literally I was making, half a step forward and I was then pushing myself 2 steps back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wasn't helpful.
I feel that. I feel that, Sib. I do. I do. And that begat some anxiety in high school, in college, in young adulthood. It truly like anxious, panic attacks, those type things because I feel like I'm pushing myself. I'm like, the older I get, I say to myself, wait a minute now. This is your journey. This is your journey. You can slow it down a bit. It's okay. Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
I it was within 1 year of Bubby dying, and I was supposed to be going to a mandolin lesson, and I picked it up, and I'm not a strong musician, and so I should have been, practicing my chords over the week, and I didn't. And all of a sudden I'm like, okay, it's 2 hours before my lesson. I better, get to it. And all of a sudden, like I had and me not being a mental health professional, like all you see in the movies is like grabbing a paper bag. Well, I didn't have one. So then what? Like
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do. Like I'm literally on the floor rocking back and forth until it just passed.
Mm.
And I knew exactly kind of, the deeper cause is my brother dying and grief and just the overwhelming all of the feelings, right, the lack of concentration that was happening, like the inconsistent sleep schedule, probably the crappy food that I was feeding myself because it's comfort food, and then it just kind of all came together in that moment. It was like, okay, yep, so then how do I manage things a little bit differently? Like you said, like being kind to ourselves and like
Being kind. Yeah.
relaxing
Yeah.
and figuring out what that is for ourselves. Like here's another thing that I've learned over the last 10 plus years is like self-care isn't just like drawing a bath. Like self-care isn't just me, getting to listen to the music that Bubby loved. Sometimes the self-care is like doing the hard things and getting the things checked off my list that I just keep um that I keep avoiding. Like I'm recognizing now that when I handle those things earlier on and then I have more space for to create something fun
Yeah. Yeah.
or to find creativity. Like that's another piece that like when I'm super, stressed out, like my creativity goes away
Yeah.
and figuring out, you know, how do I create boundaries in order to get certain things back in my life that are important to me and help me feel fulfilled, because so freaking long we felt so empty.
Yeah.
We had such a huge part of our hearts were gone forever, and the finality of it, like we knew that. You knew that at 14, right? Like you knew, like, crap, the whole rest of my life is going to be different, and like it sucks.
You are speaking into that. You're speaking into to so many different experiences that us siblings have gone through, thought about, wrestled with for years. Some of us have put things to bed, and some of us are moving on to other parts of the grief journey. But definitely able to, even if this part of you has been put to bed, it does give you that confirmation of what you went through. It gives you that confirmation that, oh, I'm not crazy. No, this was your human experience of going through the tragic loss of a sibling.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's, if you're up for it,
Yeah.
play this game of this is normal in grief. So I think, somebody recently asked me, like, they were just kind of well, I'm so exhausted all of the time. Like, is this normal in grief? Like, and they were only 7 months out. And I'm thinking, oh, my dear, like, I'm not trying to scare you, because there's more of the journey to come. And you will feel better. You will. But there's a lot of muck, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of stoplights on the interstate.
Yeah. I like that.
Right?
Stoplights. Yeah.
What else is what is normal in grief that people might question isn't? Like, because they feel like, God, this isn't normal. Like, what do you think are?
Um, you know, we in our society, we know that people love to say, "Oh, the 5 stages of grief," right? So I have seen a lot of clients that have gone through the denial phase, and then they said they've moved on from denial to a different phase, and then they feel as if they're going back. I went back a step to denial, and that's like, what's going on? I thought I had gotten over that step. Yeah.
So what's interesting is this last winter, I did take the David Kessler training for a grief educator. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was the one that created the 5 stages of grief, she was actually working with terminally ill patients. And so that was their interpretation of them about to die. It wasn't about the family members that experienced a
Right.
loved one dying. Okay, so now we're setting the record straight, and they've added a sixth stage of what's beyond acceptance. That's 5, and then
Meaning.
finding meaning,
Yeah.
finding meaning, and that's really beautiful. Um, and yeah, yeah. So first of all, the 5 stages don't actually apply in that sense, the
Yeah.
way that society has taught us.
Right.
And and secondly, there's nothing linear about our grief. Again, we were taught incorrectly
Yeah.
that it's going to be this. I like to say that if our grief journey is a quilt, there are threads of grief that are commonality. But when you put all those threads together, everybody's quilt is going to look different. And so there are the experiences, right? Like there are the common experiences, the things that I kind of named off before of like eating habits and sleeping habits. And like I just kind of wish I could just give everybody, a virtual hug and just say, whatever you're feeling right now isn't wrong. Like, it's okay. And I recognize it's going to hurt for a while.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have one more that I share with you. And people say they have pregnancy brain. I've never been pregnant before, but people say there's pregnancy brain, but there's also grief brain as well. So being lost in space and not remembering where your keys are, not remembering if you locked the door, not remembering. I had one friend